Hey, good morning. It's Steve Sawyer. It's Closet Church. This is Monday, April 15th, 2019. And I want to talk about something that is, it bothers me a lot. A few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, it might even have been, good morning, Ruth, it might even been before that, I started hearing sermons in churches that were redefining and restating who Judas actually was. And so I did some, it really bothered me because the overall trending way that they're planning on rewriting what Judas actually did is to make Jesus and Judas a co-collaborator in which Jesus actually is best friends with Judas and asks him to betray him. There are all kinds of stories. And to me, they're all ugly. Because if you follow the trail of blood, you have to ask who is trying to redeem what Judas did. Who gets benefit? Who benefits from turning Judas from a betrayer to somebody who was in collusion and almost a hero? The stuff that we know about Pilate, for example. Pilate was a coward. He may have been good at some things, but he was a coward. He surrendered to pressure to allow Jesus to be crucified. And Judas, who killed himself, and for me, it's a good riddance. I have no sense of loss for the suicide of Judas Iscariot at all. But it's smoke and mirrors. I've done enough reading and enough research that I know I can barely touch on this today. But for those of you that are going to go to church on Sunday, if they tell a story which exonerates Judas Iscariot, if they ask you to consider that Judas and Jesus were in on this and it went terribly wrong, I think you need to consider and ask yourself, why would somebody be selling a story like this? It's incredibly difficult for me to talk about, and I don't know that I could ever really be prepared in the short amount of time that I decided to bring this up. But I hope that that if this has value to any of you guys, that you'll let me know, and I can try to really prepare to do more of an exhaustive discussion about my belief that Judas Iscariot really he really is a traitor, and he was a traitor, and he was not in some kind of an agreement with Jesus of Nazareth that this was part of the plan to advance the kingdom. And I mean, I've read so many apologies that are trying to take the pressure off those who insisted on the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth. And I'm not throwing down a religion card, I'm not throwing down a race card, I'm talking about something that happened in history a long time ago. And I have wonderful friends that are Jewish friends. And no more than I should be condemned because hundreds of years ago white people, all kinds of people were involved in slavery. That's not my sin, and I don't want it laid on me, nor do I want the fact that the people who ran the Sanhedrin, that what they did be thrust upon their descendants. This is a totally separate isolation. But the reality is it was the people who were in charge of the leaders of the Jews at the time, who were also lost in the shackles of the law, which is clearly one of the reasons that they were so offended that Jesus would be called the King of the Jews, so clearly offended that he would release people from the bondage, not only by his actions, but by saying the law was made for man. Man was not made to serve the law. The truth is supposed to be living truth. And it's crushing, it's soul crushing for me to keep hearing year after year the deeds of those who insisted on the death of a purely innocent man who was the Son of God incarnate as the Son of Man, a non-resisting, non-violent person whose innocence was clearly shown, even in front of the coward Pilate. It was clearly shown in front of Herod. It was clearly shown in front of the multitudes that he preached to, that turned on him like a rabid dog because they heard their leaders say, "Give us Barabbas, crucify him." It's a human condition. It's not a race religion, an ethnic religion. But Judas, in my heart, in my mind, in my soul and spirit, and I'm not trying to force a narrative to stay alive. I just believe the new narrative that exonerates Judas Iscariot is full of lies. It is corrupt. It is trying to rewrite history in a way that you have to ask yourself, who benefits from this new narrative? I'm not saying who, I'm not saying why. I'm just saying Judas was a broken man. He was had a really he never really loved Jesus. And I think when he was given the bag of silver and he realized that the 30 pieces of gold was the equivalent of the price that somebody would get paid in those days for a healthy slave, I think he started to realize that the leaders of the Sanhedrin held him in utter contempt as well. It'll probably be my least favorite subject, but it's one of the most important subjects. Some history is true, some history is accurate, and everything about me is completely offended by the rewriting of the nature and the character of the betrayal of Jesus Christ. And I don't think Judas ought to get off the hook, and I think we ought to follow the trail and find out who benefits from the new narrative. And it's happening every year. And like I said, first time I heard it, it was over 10 years ago. It could have been 20 years ago. I know I was in a church and I got up and walked out because I was just shocked that they were selling a new narrative. And it didn't make sense. And I've done a lot of reading about it for over 20 years, and there is nothing in it that sounds true to me. You all can make up your own mind, obviously, and I want you to, and I don't mind if you disagree with me. I don't. It's okay by me if you believe that Judas and Jesus were cooperating together to advance his kingdom and something went wrong. We all have to believe something. You can't just read the account in the Bible. You need to open your mind and read between the lines, discover the character and the character flaws that you see in Pilate, in Herod, in Judas, and read between the lines and see that there were no character flaws in the life of Jesus. All the apostles were weak men. They had their strengths, but they also had their weaknesses. Why would Peter deny Jesus? I think it's a discussion that should be maintained, and I think maybe in Closet Church we can, well, I know I'm going to take a stand against Judas Iscariot as being anything but a coward and a traitor. So that's all I can say about it. If I have the heart and the courage to discuss it later this week, I will. But it's a big study. It's a big subject. So I ask that God bring peace into your lives and into your heart. And just like we have to do in politics, like we have to do in everything, see who benefits by the narrative and the story, and then judge and see if it's true or not. So anyway, Judas.